Hello, everyone. I'm Ninu Kang, Eva BC's Executive Director. Welcome to our Wellness and Networking session. I'll be facilitating this experience with you today. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat at any time, and we will get back to you. Throughout this session, we will be using the chat box a lot, so please be prepared to participate with us through the chat box a little bit more. I hope you enjoyed the one day, our first day yesterday, and feel energized by this morning's keynote. Before we get started with our wellness session, we'll start by hearing a greeting from our honored guest speaker, Grace Lohr, the Parliamentary Secretary for Gender Equity. Now, Grace Lohr is no stranger to all of us at this training forum. She was elected as an MLA from Victoria Beacon Hill in 2020. Her work is deeply rooted in the community, as she's been a dedicated anti-violence advocate. She's also an academic instructor, researcher, and community housing organizer in her life. Prior to the election, she taught in the Department of Political Science at the University of Victoria and previously at the University of British Columbia. She taught Canadian politics, gender and politics, statistics, and research methods. Her research focused on political participation and representation, electoral systems, and social media harassment and online violence. She's worked closely with the Victoria Sexual Assault Centre and other anti-violence organizations to create inclusive, accessible, and survivor-centered sexual assault response. And so I'd like to now bring in Grace's comments, and welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Lohr, and I'm the Parliamentary Secretary for Gender Equity. My pronouns are she and her, and please excuse my voice. I lost it 2 weeks ago, and it's just coming back. I'm so glad to be joining you today, and I wish I could be with you there in person, but with the House in session, I'm joining virtually from the territory of the Lekwungen peoples of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. First, my gratitude to each of you for the work that you do in our communities every single day. And also my gratitude for the expertise, the sharing and learning that you are doing here during the training forum. I'm sure you've covered many really important topics in your sessions already. And I know that the dialogue you are having, the sharing of best practices, the connections and the relationships you're building are essential to helping survivors. Sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and family violence, femicide, and all forms of gender-based violence remain all too prevalent across our province. And we know that the effects are devastating and long-lasting. We know that danger increased during the pandemic. Family violence increased in intensity and frequency and complexity over the last 3 years, and we know sexualized violence rose as restrictions eased. In August of this year, StatsCan issued new data on police-reported crime, and of those reported, sexual assaults in BC were up 15% last year from the previous year. Your compassion and care and support are among the most important and challenging work here in our province over the pandemic. We're on the eve of the annual International 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence, which was started 31 years ago, and yet the issues persist. Too many people in our province are not safe and don't feel safe. And most of these people are women, Indigenous women, immigrants and newcomers, racialized women, trans women and others in the 2S LGBTQ community, and those with disabilities are especially targeted with violence. There's an urgent need to support survivors and address the causes and sources of violence. Along with the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General, work is underway to develop an action plan to help gender-based violence. Engagement sessions with representatives in the anti-violence sector, including many of you, occurred earlier this year. Those conversations have continued, and I continue to appreciate and rely on the expertise and knowledge that each of you and all those on the front line hold. because we know we need to work side by side with survivors, with partners, with frontline service providers to prioritize where we need to focus and to ensure that everyone has the same access to services and supports. We know we need a coordinated cross-government approach. We know we need to align with and build on other important initiatives, including BC's response to the National Inquiry's calls for justice into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people, the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, led by Women and Gender Equality Canada and announced earlier this month. We know from survivors, service providers, partners, and others that there are gaps. And by addressing these gaps, we will ensure that there are appropriate supports for survivors, and we'll remove those barriers that prevent people from leaving violent situations or from accessing the help they need. I want to take a brief minute to talk about important work already underway. 20 million to the Ending Violence Association of BC to support emergency sexual assault services. An additional 10 million that will provide stable funding for sexual assault response services starting next year. Through BC Housing, 734 million is being used to provide 1,500 new units of housing for women leaving violence, including transition and safe homes, second state housing, and affordable housing. For example, new housing for women and their families leaving violence in Prince George. Ground has broken on housing for women experiencing intimate partner violence in Victoria, in Kitimat, and in Campbell River. We've updated employment standards to provide paid leave for people facing domestic violence or sexual violence. Connecting with community about what steps we need to take to address the non-consensual disclosure of intimate images. Working with education in the education system on education and awareness in K-12 and post-secondary schools, as well as mandatory sexualized violence and misconduct policies at all post-secondary institutions. We have a lot of work ahead. There's still a big distance between where we are and where we need to be. And I know that we can't do it alone. I know we're not doing it alone. I want to thank each of you for being here, for your experience, for your compassion, for your determination. And I really look forward to hearing more of what comes out of your training forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Parliamentary Secretary Grace Lohr. We call her Grace because she's one of us. And also P.S. Nikki Sharma earlier for her wonderful message. And we apologize for some of the technical difficulties on our end with regards to the video and sound. But it is so inspiring to see our women allies in the government who are embedded in their work in our community and who understand. And so we're really grateful and also really proud of them. So thank you, Grace, for your message. I also want to say I had a chance to meet with Grace, and I'm sure she's okay with me telling you this, but that she actually lost her voice. So we're super grateful to her for taking the time out and doing the message for us. As promised, our wellness and networking session today will focus on how we can find our wellness while doing the work that we do. We hope you're seeing this theme come strong through the last day and today. So we also received funding for the Department of Justice through the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General for a service provider wellness and training project. Much of that funding is being used to offer wellness events and resources for anti-violence workers. But we also hope to be able to share the key messages coming out of this session today from the keynote with Sheri and your contributions. And we want to put them into an infographic that will become part of our wellness resource. And then we want to share it back with you before March 2023 as part of the project that we've taken on. To get us started and to think more deeply about this, we will hear from our very own Sheri Bishop, and I know you had a chance to see her yesterday in action, Eva BC's co-chair with Linnell, who also led yesterday's morning session. With her keynote, it takes a sector caring for the front lines. That's the title of her keynote. And as Sheri tells us, providing support and services for those who are impacted by violence opens us up to experiencing both negative and positive impacts. As part of her professional research, Sheri asked people who work in the anti-violence front lines about how they felt that they could be supported on the personal, organizational, and even at a provincial level. She'll share her findings with us now. And hopefully her thoughts will help frame our discussion about what you need to do to support wellness. As Sheri shared with us yesterday, in addition to being a co-chair of Ending Violence Association BC, she is the agency director of Nicola Valley Community Human Resources Association, also known as Nicola Family Therapy, where she holds a full clinical caseload. Every time I call, Sheri, she's always like, "Oh, I can fit you in between clients." And she also serves on the board of Nicola Family and Nicola Women in Action, which governs the Merit Police-Based Victim Service programs. Now, without further ado, I'm going to invite Sheri back to join you.
Good morning again, everyone. And before I begin, I would like to once again respectfully acknowledge that I am coming to you from EVA BC's office today, which is located on the ancestral and ceded and traditional territories belonging to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So thank you for joining with me today. It is my hope that you see me standing beside you instead of in front of you. I'm not an expert. I'm a woman who did some research for her thesis and then who, like you, does her best to show up every day with passion and dedication for the work that we do. I'm a frontline worker who leads often from the side of her desk. As we all know, there is not enough funding for gender-based violence services to meet the needs of those we serve. Therefore, I serve before I can lead. But with that, try to do both the best that I can. Sorry. Just like me, you all continue to show up, and the work is hard, and you continue to show up. So thank you. So for the next 20 minutes, I plan to talk about worker wellness in relation to my thesis research on vicarious traumatization, where I will share the voices from the front line way back in 2010, and then through my experiences on the front line and in leadership since then, challenge us to look at where we are now and what more needs to be done. I entered this sector straight out of university way back in 1998. With my degree in hand, I started working in Transition House, and through the years have also worked in community-based victim services, peace, and the Stopping the Violence programs. I've always known this is where my passion lies, and nonprofit was the only place for me. In 2010, I completed my Master's of Social Work, and the research I did back then is where I will start today. My thesis research aimed to ask the question, what do frontline workers know about vicarious traumatization? How are they impacted by the work? How do they take care of themselves in the work? And what more was needed? Vicarious traumatization is an occupational health and safety concern. We, as frontline workers, have the honor of meeting and working alongside survivors every day. And with that, while we get to bear witness to their strengths and resiliency, we are also exposed to horrific trauma stories of human cruelty. You see, we can't prevent against vicarious trauma because as workers on the front lines, we cannot control what a client is going to share. And we don't ever, at least I have never, shut down someone's trauma story, even when I felt it was too much to bear. Vicarious trauma changes the way we see and experience the world, and it's cumulative, meaning it's not based on that worst story we've ever heard. It's the thousands of stories we have heard over time. I can openly say that I have experienced vicarious traumatization. My sense of safety in the world has been altered through this work. Just ask my family. They all know to stay close to me when we're entering the house because if they fall too far behind, they often find themselves locked out. An automatic response, not a conscious one, by all means. Thankfully, we use lighthearted humor and laugh at the reoccurring situation of my husband getting stopped by a locked door a couple seconds after I've entered the house and knocking as he says, "Really?" This is just one tiny example, but I'm happy to report that I'm able to show up every day and work from the front lines because of the personal and professional self-care practices that work to keep me well. With my research, I decided to engage 7 transition houses and their organizations from Prince George to Prince Rupert. The first round of the data collection involved questionnaires sent out to all 7 organizations. The second round included 13 interviews, and in the last round, I conducted a focus group with the staff of 1 house. From the beginning, my hope was to conduct a quality piece of research so that it could mean something and I could give back to the front line. Here are some of the key things I learned from the voices on the front line. Almost everyone participating in my research identified they had personally experienced trauma in their lives. For many of us, we are the women we work with. We are not immune, and we too are vulnerable. When exploring overall worker awareness, 1 in 3 identified that they did not feel personally affected by the trauma stories that they heard through the work. This finding blew me away. So I brought the finding back to the interview and focus group stage of data collection. And when I asked why workers might answer this way, participants shared the following rationalizations. 1, a possible lack of awareness and understanding of vicarious traumatization. 2, workers may feel that admitting they are impacted would be seen as a competency issue. And 3, possibly the response is a situation of desensitization or denial by the worker, as some like to call it, a shutting down on the part of the worker. Not to take away from the other 2 rationalizations, but let's just spend a minute on the issue of perceived competency. Workers felt that to do this work, they had to be superhuman. They were hired to do this work, therefore they should not be impacted. They should be able to handle it. And if not, they would be seen, or they feared they would be seen as unable to handle this work altogether. If I reflect back to my early years, I too remember situations where I did not reach out and say, "This is too much," or "I need help for that exact reason." It is from this finding alone, we must make sure to create a work culture that normalizes that this work will impact us and that it is okay to ask for help and for what you need. I know as a leader today, this one finding and my personal experience on the front lines has stayed with me, and it guides me in how I choose to show up, check in, and support my staff on a daily basis. For those that said they did feel personally impacted, they shared experiences of anger, frustration, sadness, overwhelm, weight gain, personal relationship issues, increased hesitation to consider relationships, sleep pattern problems, lack of energy, lack of trust, their own personal and or past trauma being triggered, an inability to set down the stories at the end of the day, viewing the world differently, not feeling safe in the world, hypervigilant, helpless. They experienced emotional releases such as crying and a sense of cumulative fatigue, haunting memories of things shared and feelings of futility regarding a client situation. One respondent shared, "After experiencing personal trauma in my life, I feel triggered by the traumatic stories. I often become emotional, fearful, or nervous, and sometimes I dream about the stories I have heard." When asked what they do to deal with all the stories they hear and the impacts of the work, most participants' first response was debrief with coworkers. In addition, other responses included exercise, eating healthy, cry when needed, work with a therapist, education, physical activity, hobbies, supportive friends, sweats, elders, spirituality, self-care, boundaries, training, limiting exposure to trauma and its material, such as not watching the news, ask for help when needed, laugh, venting with coworkers, appreciating and fostering positive relationships, having a positive outlook, volunteering in the community, maintaining a quiet, private life, taking regular holidays, meditation, dance, sing, yoga, travel, and the list goes on. But can I say, when I saw those answers, I was like, yes, let me tell you, I loved it. You see, because while we cannot prevent vicarious trauma, we can actively work to lessen its impact. And how that is done is through the ABC model. A is for awareness, attunement with self. So checking in with self and answering the questions like, what's going on for me? What am I feeling in my body? How do I feel when I leave work? What stories did I hear today? How am I experiencing my clients? How am I treating my family? How am I feeling inside? How am I taking care of myself? Am I getting enough rest? Do I engage in things outside of work? Am I feeling connected or disconnected to others? B is for balance. This is everything that we can offer that can offer us balance in work, rest, and play. So what we're really talking about is safe coping skills and self-care practices. And how do we incorporate those into our lives? How do we take care of ourselves so that we're doing the best that we can in the important work that we do? My son just turned 9, and since having him, he has helped me to engage in a lot of play. As a woman, mother, wife, frontline worker, leader, I have so many parts of me, but I often ask myself, am I nourishing all the parts of me? What am I missing? Whether that becomes engaging in creative endeavors, new learnings, playing with my son, spending time with amazing, fabulous women in my life, taking time for self, or just giving myself permission to rest. And C is for connection, having that connection to yourself, to others, and to something larger than you. This is where connection in our work and outside our work is so important. This is also where training and networking opportunities are really seen as important work. Then there is connecting to something larger than you, which might involve engaging in spirituality, social action, volunteering in the community. As you know from my intro, I sit on a community board and at the provincial level with Eva. For me, this is my effort to connect to something larger, and it really helps in my overall wellness. So back to my research. The participants also shared what they felt would help and what more is needed at the organizational level. Education about vicarious traumatization, tools and skills to lessen the impact debriefing and support when needed without judgment and or consequence. Some identified the training should be mandatory and needed for both frontline and leadership. Access to counseling after a serious incident was identified, in addition to more balanced work duties, breaks, time off, training, celebrations, team building, and sharing of ideas. A really big theme in the research data was leadership checking in regularly and connecting with the front lines. And then honoring the informal debriefing process we have, but offering more formal debriefing opportunities for the frontline workers. Lastly, I thought it was important to also ask participants about professional self-care strategies they would like to see implemented in the workplace. And you know what? They didn't say wellness retreats and big ideas that cost bunches of money. They said things like leadership encouraging self-care practices by sending emails or memos with self-care ideas. They said encouraging and supporting workers to take regular breaks. They said providing information and ideas on strategies that work to lessen the impacts. They said gym memberships. They said supporting staff when they need to take time off. They also said sharing success stories, small wins, positive outcomes, and again, more regular connection between frontline staff and leadership. So if I move past this research done 12 years ago to today, I wonder if many of you can resonate with the impacts workers have shared, what helps and what more is needed. Is what was true 12 years ago still true today for workers on the front line? As I look at my work experience since this research, many of this still stands true for me, and much more needs to be done better. Debriefing. To honor staff and the informal systems created to help them manage this work, we need to train frontline staff and leadership on effective and safe debriefing practices. One such example is low impact debriefing. But we must also offer greater access to formal debriefing. Supervision. There should be adequate and appropriate clinical supervision for all. Administrative supervision is not clinical supervision. If there is no funding, we need to create it through skilled peer support, through whatever means possible, Zoom, phone, groups, etc. Community-based victim services and outreach programs need this just as much as stopping the violence programs do. Trauma-informed workplace or practice in the workplace. So this is making sure we are applying trauma-informed principles and practice to staff as well as clients. For example, making sure we offer safe environments where staff and employees feel they can speak up and they can be themselves and that they are not going to be harmed by others in the workplace. When it comes to trustworthiness and transparency, making sure staff know how decisions are made and communicating those decisions to staff in a trauma-informed way. Working to create an atmosphere of trust so frontline staff can trust the administration and leadership to make decisions that are in their best interest. When we look at peer support, offering time and space where staff members can support each other, where they can come together and address the impacts of the work and also celebrate the successes, so we can celebrate the joy of the work that we do. Celebrating those in our organization at a provincial level. So many companies honor those that work for them. I don't think in this sector we do that so well. I also do not think that we're rocking this in our organizations. We are the compassionate workers who give and often never receive. Next year will be my 25th year working in the sector, my silver anniversary, if you may. What would it mean for those of us in the sector to be recognized a little? And recognized along the way, not just on the way out. You see, I do not believe that we're purposely letting anniversaries and recognition opportunities pass by, but that we're often just too busy in the day-to-day work. But we can do better. Wellness days, retreats. Why must we always tack on some kind of learning or strategic planning onto a wellness retreat? Why do we have to do more work to justify taking time and creating opportunity to care for self and our staff? Wellness days, I think it's in us to give. If we budget for all our staffing hours at the start of the year, we could give the gift of a wellness day, which does not cost anything extra. One could argue that wellness days might impact service, but I argue if we don't take care of our workers, that will impact service even more. In my agency, the board gives staff a wellness day as a gift of appreciation for all that they do, but I believe we can do better. I know another agency that offers staff 12 wellness days a year over and above their sick time. Wow, we need to start changing the culture. Our staff and leaders all work so hard. We need to invest in their wellness so that they can keep doing this important work. It's not money wasted, but well invested. Team building. Every day we are in the trenches and doing our work. And during our workday, our team is all that we have. Taking time to connect and be with each other is not wasted time or something we do after we get all the work done. The work is never done. Let's start with it and invest in our teams. Training our boards. Our leaders' responsibility is to take care of staff and manage organizational risk, move agencies forward, and the list goes on and on. It is our organization's board's job to really take care of leadership. Are we training our boards effectively? Do they know the work we do and how hard the work can be? Do they know how best to support our leaders in this sector? We cannot forget about our leaders. They need to be seen, celebrated, and cared for too. These are just the tip of the iceberg of what we could be doing better. And there are so many more left to be identified. But before my time comes to an end, I just want to talk briefly about COVID. As you all know, we continue to move through this pandemic, and as I reflect on the journey so far, I think, wow, even in the most scariest times of our history thus far, we continue to show up. When the world shut down, we all had to work more in isolation than we'd ever experienced. We worked from home, juggled parenting, caregiving, work with no separation for many. As I said earlier, we are not immune to gender-based violence. So for some of us, workers now found themselves working from home, trying to manage even more challenges and safety risks. This pandemic did, in some ways, offer more connection to others in the sector, because as the world shut down and we became more isolated, organizations like EVA stepped up and worked to connect more and bring us together virtually. The province and country recognized increased risk of gender-based violence and an importance of our work and identified us as essential workers. For many of us, we received federal grant funding, and I know from my agency that offered the opportunity to increase staff numbers working on the front lines. However, with ever-growing need of service, even with more on the front lines, our workloads have not decreased. For me, COVID reaffirmed our passion and commitment to the work we do and the individuals we serve. I sat in on many STV calls because that's the program that I work under. So I can only imagine the same amazingness was happening at outreach level, at the outreach programs and the community-based victim services. But I heard from workers their strategies and quick action to stay connected with the clients. Some talked about changing their work hours to be able to connect with those who are moms after they put their kids to bed. For many of us, we are now engaging with clients in new ways, with new forms of technology, and we worked it out as we went. Groups online, sessions online, when safe to do so. When a layer of restrictions dropped, we were rotating presence in the office to limit possible exposure with our coworkers so that we could connect in a safe place with those most at risk. We were quick to move to the outdoors, walking with clients and meeting clients in parks, still remaining 6 feet of distance and trying to manage confidentiality and safety risks. Our frontline workers, our leaders, the provincial umbrella organizations never stopped. We were essential. We are essential. And until gender-based violence is no more, we will always be essential. And we need to take care of all of us in this sector on every level. We just need to do better. Thank you.
Wow. How do you follow that? How do you follow that? All I can say is I'm thrilled that you're in my corner. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sheri. This morning, Aaron and Samantha really shared with us, at the national level, what they found and validated what we knew. And you at such a personal level, Sheri, and from an organizational, your research is really, again, I think validated what we know and what we experience. I keep looking over here because you're right here in the room with me. So rather than, sort of being out with the rest of them. So thank you so much, Sheri.